And welcome back to this week's edition of the Steel Report. My guest appearing for the first time as the mayor of Cedar Falls. Please welcome Mayor Danny Laudick. And I know we were on the program talking about this one time. I think it was during the campaign. This is your first appearance, though, since becoming mayor. So I guess my really first question, we're going to talk about a strategic plan that you have going, but any big surprises that you could talk about as far as this is not exactly what I was expecting as mayor. Any big surprises there? Yeah.
Two things. One, I would say, is the first thing is trying to balance the big stuff because you're in charge of long-term vision for the community, like we'll talk about the strategic planning. But looking at the budget, which it's not just this year's budget, it's you're having to plan this year, but you're looking 20 years out on where are we going, CIP, the capital improvement plan. And then at the same time, they'll get a phone call and someone's got a raccoon in their yard. and when people call you, you can't say, no, it's below me. And so you get it to the right people, you get it taken care of, but just trying to balance how much time do you spend trying to solve residents' issues one at a time versus the time you need to spend working with staff, council, and long-term planning, community partnerships, building relationships with you and I, because they're a huge partner of ours going forward as a community, with legislators, national and state. And so just trying to balance the day-to-day of the calls that come in, residents have a concern, and a big part of my focus was rebuilding that relationship with the community. You and I were talking about Mayor Cruz when he was around. And something he was incredible at was he was at everything. He attended every event. There'd be 5 events at the same time, and somehow he made it to all of them. But just that relationship with the community is something I think Cedar Falls has always put a lot of importance on for the role of mayor. So just trying to balance being in the community, talking to everybody, but also being hands-on with staff, with programs that we're working on, with the CIP, looking at where we're focusing our efforts, and just finding that balance. Second thing is, everybody wants more services, but then at the budget time of year, no one wants to spend any money. And so just that constant dynamic of everybody wants services, they want the quality of life, they want the new parks, but then you got to figure out how to balance that in the budget that doesn't put too much weight on residents, that is something people can afford. So just that constant struggle of, people want things, but we don't want to spend anything, and how do you really prioritize what we spend on? Because Ron Gaines, what he'll tell me often is, we can do anything, we just can't do everything. And Cedar Falls is in a great place as a city, just overall quality of life, our financial situation is in a really good spot. So we're going to the strategic planning, that's kind of what we're trying to get to is, okay, if we can do anything, what exactly do we want to do and what do we focus on? Because we can't do everything, but we really are set up to be able to do some great things for the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing you're talking about, this strategic plan, is called Charting Tomorrow. That's the campaign name. Kind of says what it's all about right in a nutshell, but how do you view Charting Tomorrow? What does it mean?
So strategic planning is one of those things that can be performative. It can just be a bunch of conversation. You create a plan. It sits on the shelf. This for us really is, council, we do goal setting every year. So we get together, we look at what are the priorities for next year, what are the goals, what are the things we want to focus on, but it's not really a long-term plan, and any big projects take more than a year. So the goal was, okay, we need to chart more of a 3 to 5 year plan, and you can't really plan much further than that. Things change too much. But also we wanted to re-engage with residents to ask them, what do we want Cedar Falls to look like 20 years from now? A big part of my campaigning was saying, when I grew up here 20 years ago, we made really good investments in the trail systems, the industrial parks, CFU did the fiber internet, we built a new Falls Aquatic Center. Those weren't easy, cheap projects. A lot of those were big, expensive capital projects, but they were done with intent based on what the community wanted to see for itself, and we've been set up really well for the last 20 years because of that. So then for me it was, okay, we're at a point where the last 6, 8 years we had some big single issue topics that were really important topics, but kind of distracted us and just focused us on those topics. And we wanted to get back to, okay, what is the plan for the next 10, 20 years, that vision that we have, that residents have, so that we can then sit down with staff, with myself, with council, and say, okay, what do we really need to do in the next 3 to 5 years tactically to set us up to get to where we want to be 20 years from now.
One of the things, recently the mayors have not been in office that long after John Cruz. How long do you think it takes to, or you've probably thought this out since you are a strategic planner type, what have you thought about? How many years will it take me to accomplish really what I'd like to see this city do?
And so I had a lot of people ask when I was campaigning,
Yeah.
how long are you sticking around for?
Yeah.
Because I think exactly that. We went from a 34, 36-year mayor
Right.
to we've gone through a few cycles of shorter mayor terms. And my goal back then, and what I would say I've confirmed, is still probably 8 to 12 years, because I really think, being now 1 year in, it takes the first year, because you don't even control the budget for the first year, because you're elected January 1st. We're on a fiscal year cycle, so the budget starts July 1st. But you do goal setting right after you're elected in November. So you're kind of setting the goals in the budget for the next year before you've even had a chance to get into it. So this year, having the first year, is when you really start to get a handle on, okay, how does our funding work? What pools of funds do we have? How does the property taxes work versus state funding we get versus sewer fees and water fees, which are kind of separate. So I would say it takes a good 2 years to even get in there, figure out how things work. If you're trying to not just come in and bulldoze stuff, if you really want to come in, figure out where things are at, but then to start to set some priorities, okay, based on my background, based on what I'm hearing from our new council, we had 3 new council members this last time around, so almost half the group, to really say, okay, now we have a handle on it, where do we want to start pushing a little bit? What levers do we want to start moving? Quality of life projects, which are usually property tax funded because there's not other ways to fund those. Which ones do we want to prioritize? And those types of projects, if you're talking sports complexes, if you're talking parks improvements, that doesn't happen in 1 year. You have to budget ahead for it. You have to plan ahead. And so I would say you really need at minimum 4 years to even start figuring out, 2 years to figure out what's needed to be done, 2 years to really start getting that in process. And then if you want to see it through, probably at least another 4 years or so to really make sure it's getting in progress.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of people might see this, might say, well, what is your top priority? What do you see as the #1 issue right now?
Yeah. So based on our goal setting this year, there's a lot of conversation around the quality of life piece, parks, recreation, and really enhancing. We've fallen behind on some of the recreation piece compared to what other communities are doing. Cedar Falls, we value, and well, right now our consultant that's working on the strategic plan, they've done a few focus groups, worked with staff and council, and one thing they saw though was our citizens love our services. Usually they say every town they go to, everyone's complaining about this service or that service. They have not heard any of that from Cedar Falls in terms of the basic core services of roads, utilities, infrastructure. Like, we are very fortunate there. The thing we've been hearing from people though is they're wondering, okay, are we investing in the quality of life amenities that will attract young families, that will keep people here, will keep young graduates here? Every employer is talking about being able to find people to hire. And so that's the big piece. Like I said, it's hard to fund those. It's not, that's the soft stuff that isn't as easy to justify. So we're really trying to take a step back and say, okay, we just did the new Parks Master Plan, had over 1,000 responses from residents on that, on what would they like to see in the parks, new amenities, new improvements to the trail systems. And again, we can't do everything, so we really want to focus in on what are the things we can do, because Cedar Falls has always been very fiscally responsible, the way we budget. We have very little debt, partly because we need to catch up on some projects. But so we're in a really good spot to say, okay, what are the priorities? What do we want to focus on? And where do we want to put some of our resources that we have for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, we look at the trail system, for example. I live in Hudson, so I can take the trail system, go anywhere I want. Cedar Falls is an easy trip, it's all paved, it's amazing. You have a Ragbri stop, coming in this summer. That's going to show off the area once again. You have to be excited about that, though there's a tremendous amount of planning that has to go into that, just safety alone.
A lot of planning.
Yeah.
And great for downtown. So yeah, Ragbri's coming through this July. Sturgis will be engaging more downtown this year. You'll have Ragbri, the street party to do, but it takes a lot of planning work, and most of the details haven't been figured out yet. We know we're on the route. We just started having those planning meetings with Ragbri to figure out exactly where's the route, campsites, how everything's going to work, and it's expensive too. We'll be looking for sponsors, so if anyone out there is looking to contribute a little bit, but it's tens of thousands of people coming through for a night. So
people always say, "Hey, Ron, have you ridden Ragbri? I'll bet you've ridden it a long time, haven't you?" Not once. The only time I've only ridden 1 mile, and that was in 2008 when Ragbri came into Cedar Falls. I chased down Lance Armstrong for a 43-second interview. He was kind enough to give it to me just about the time he was having some of his controversy. But it's the only time I've ridden Ragbri 1 mile. Yeah.
Well, just so you know, the route coming into Cedar Falls and the day after is the shortest route. It's only 38 miles.
And that'll take them in earlier in the day, and that helps. I think that ultimately, economically, can be a big factor.
That's something the team has to plan on. And it's a team of community members, Main Street, some of our tourism team, so it's a broad, it's not really the city's event. it's kind of a broad mix. But there's going to be people showing up at 10 a.m.
Right, exactly.
So it's going to be a busy day.
Fantastic. So what kind of person are you? You mentioned quality of life a couple of times. Obviously, that is going to be a huge factor in your lives, of your family, and the families that you're trying to serve in Cedar Falls that look to you to say, hey, what's the plan, you know?
Yeah. So for me, my background, I worked a lot in economic development, business development before this role, which was a mix of community, nonprofits. So I worked on the workforce side, so working with employers to attract people to the area, reduce barriers to employment, language barriers, transportation. So I got to work kind of with the business community, with the nonprofit community. Had started a few businesses like the Cedar Valley Makers, the industrial makerspace here in Waterloo. Helped start the co-working space Mill Race in downtown Cedar Falls. And a lot of my focus was always, my wife and I, we want to have our family here. I grew up here. She's from Westgate up by Sumner. And so we're always looking at, okay, the decisions we're making today have a 20-year impact. So how do we plan on today what our kids, grandkids are going to use for the next 20, 40 years? And I think a lot of it with my workforce background came to that quality of life. It used to be people went where employers were. That shifted in the last 20, 30 years to employers go where people are. So these soft things, quality of life amenities, arts and culture, parks and rec, have become a more driving part of a community's economic well-being because people choose where they want to live and then they find an employer.
And how best can they contact you?
Yeah, so the best way to contact, so if you go to the city website, there's a button on the page, has all the information, or if you go directly to cedarfalls.com/strategic plan, we have kind of a just standard page that has a link to the actual survey site. And these questions are really, the parks plan was very focused on parks, recreational. This survey is much more based around, okay, what would you like Cedar Falls to be in 20 years? What would you like to see more of? What would you like to see less of? Of all the types of services we could offer, economic development, roads and traffic, parks and rec, like how would you weight your importance of what you would like to see us focus on? So we'll take all that information. We just had a few focus groups this last week that the consultant came into town for. We also then are doing a full survey with staff to get their thoughts on what are our weaknesses, what are we great at, where can we improve. We did a half day with all the staff leadership to get their thoughts. And then we'll take all that information with council, with city staff leadership, and sit down and say, okay, what are our 4 to 7 key priorities for the next 3 to 5 years? And then map out what are we measuring, what are the KPIs we're committing to report to the community. Because a piece of this too is just holding us accountable to make sure if these are the priorities, here's what we're committing to measure, to report to the community on, and make sure that we're making progress on what's important to the residents.
Well, that's fantastic. Mayor Danny Laudick, thank you so much. Make sure you go to the Cedar Falls website, take advantage of the opportunity to give your input. I mean, that's really important. That's what you're looking for, absolutely.
And so, I would, if I could make a personal ask. I know a lot of times these types of city surveys, people think, well, they're just going to go do what they're going to do anyway. This is a very intentional process to make sure we are using that input. Like I've always said, it's not supposed to be my vision for Cedar Falls. It's supposed to be the community's vision. And it's hard to get people's feedback nowadays. You work in media. You know how hard it is to get people's attention. So this is the first step. Once we have the draft, we will be taking it back to the community, getting feedback. But if people really have thoughts about where should we go as a community, what should the priorities be, this is the time to really get it included.
Okay, Mayor Laudick, thank you so much for coming in. I really, really appreciate about that. We're going to wrap things up here on the Steel Report in just a moment. And welcome back to this week's edition of the Steel Report. Right now, I want you to get out your phone and get ready to scan a QR code. Here's what I'm talking about. I want to remind you of a very important event coming up on February 28th, but the organizers of the event want to have everyone registered by this Tuesday, February 18th. This is going to be a suicide prevention and awareness training session sponsored by the well-known suicide prevention nonprofit Alive and Running, Mercy One, Unity Point Health, and Blackhawk County Public Health. This February 28th event is free to the public and also includes lunch. The training session will feature QPR, Question, Persuade, and Refer, training headed by members of the Waterloo Youth City Council. Scan this QR code and it will take you right to the registration page. And again, be sure to register by this Tuesday, February 18th, for the February 28th training. This will be held at the Waterloo Center for the Arts. It very well could be life-saving. That's it for this week. Just one more Steel Report before the show comes to an end. As always, thanks for watching.